Hello Year 10, this is Miss Tollman. I'm going to be talking you through Bayonet Charge in this video by Ted Hughes. Okay, so Bayonet Charge was published in 1957. It was Ted Hughes, it was published in his first ever book of poetry and he was 27 years old. So I want you to maybe bear that in mind a little bit as we're reading the poem, which you should remember features a soldier who's likely to have been quite a young man at the time. And we might be able to think that maybe the experience that soldier had, the idea of that may have resonated a bit for Ted Hughes himself. So before we start looking at the poem, these are three words that I have chosen that actually come from the poem, so you should recognize them: king, honor, and human dignity. So if we look at the first word, king, it's a very obviously sort of common word in lots of ways. We can use it metaphorically to talk about being the king of, a game that you're particularly good at, or a skill. Obviously, it also means a monarch, meaning a monarch is basically a king or a queen, anybody who is the head of state. So we do have a monarchy, as you know, in Britain, where the Queen is the monarch. She's the head of state in England. Lots of countries don't have a monarchy, though. They just have governments instead of a king or a queen. King, on the other hand, is also something that is very symbolic. So, when this poem, which we can assume refers to World War One, when this war was on, it was King Edward, I think the seventh. Yeah, I think it was King Edward the seventh, who was on the throne, and he would have been, an idea that a lot of soldiers and also their generals would have sort of encouraged people to fight for, because the king represented fighting for your country. So it was symbolic as well as referring to an actual person. And then we have honor. So honor is an abstract noun, and it refers to something that is something very idealistic in a way, this idea of being respected. If you have honor, or if you behave in an honorable way, it means that you have done something that people value and respect. And you might do something where you maybe don't get any sort of obvious gain. Maybe you don't get paid for something that you've done, or there isn't sort of an immediate reward, but this idea of doing things for honor, just for the glory of having done the right thing or doing a good thing, is very important for a lot of people who might make choices for sort of more internal reasons. Internal meaning to do with what they think and believe. And then finally, we have this noun phrase, which is human dignity. It's quite interesting that Ted Hughes puts the word human in here, because we might actually sort of think that there are ways that the soldier behaves in this poem that is almost a little bit animal. So, again, this sort of idealized idea that, human dignity is when you sort of have self-respect. You're kind of doing something because of your own self-esteem, and as a result, then you might earn the respect of others as well. Okay, so these are the three words that I want us to be thinking about, and the theme for this group of three poems that you're looking at this week. So Bayonet Charge, The Charge of the Light Brigade, and Storm on the Island are physical and metaphorical battles. So physical battles meaning actual physical fighting, but metaphorical battles can be, when you're fighting with an idea, or maybe fighting with yourself, or maybe fighting with powers that are beyond your control in some way. And I think those, all of those, come up quite strongly in this poem. Okay, so we'll start by reading the poem. So again, just a reminder, title is Bayonet Charge, just in case anybody is really sort of struggling to remember what the title actually means. So we should know that a bayonet is the sort of a knife-like weapon that was it was kind of attached to the end of a rifle. So that you had two ways of killing your enemy. You could either shoot them, but if you were fighting in very close contact, you could also stab them with the end of your bayonet. And of course, charge means that this soldier has been ordered by his commander to run towards the enemy. So this is very important. There's a lot of reference to running in this poem, and the soldier is not running away, he is running towards the enemy. He has been ordered to run towards the enemy. So it's very important that this is a charge. Okay, so here we go. Suddenly he awoke and was running, in raw seamed hot khaki, his sweat heavy, stumbling across a field of clods towards a green hedge that dazzled with rifle fire, hearing bullets smacking the belly out of the air. He lugged a rifle, numb as a smashed arm. The patriotic tear that had brimmed in his eye, sweating like molten iron from the center of his chest. In bewilderment, then, he almost stopped. In what cold clockwork of the stars and the nations was he the hand pointing that second? He was running like a man who has jumped up in the dark and runs, listening between his footfalls for the reason of his still running. And his foot hung like statuary in mid-stride. Then the shot-slashed furrows threw up a yellow hair that rolled like a flame and crawled in a threshing circle, its mouth wide open, silent, its eyes standing out. He plunged past with his bayonet towards the green hedge. King, honor, human dignity, etc., dropped like luxuries in a yelling alarm to get out of that blue crackling air, his terrors touchy dynamite. Okay, so we're going to look at this poem stanza by stanza. The structure of it, even though it is in three sort of quite distinct stanzas, you'll notice that there's a lot of enjambment, meaning there's a lot of the sort of drawn out sentences that go not only across lines but also across stanzas, which we can infer from that a bit later, but it suggests there's a lot of chaos in this experience, that this is not a sort of a smooth and graceful attack. This is sort of, there's stopping and starting, in the sense that he doesn't feel filled with courage in a sort of a smooth, continual run. There's a lot of kind of clumsiness and feeling like he's struggling, basically. Okay, so let's have a look at the first stanza. So the first thing that is very sort of, noticeable and that really stands out for us is the very first line. So suddenly he awoke and was running. So this is called in media res. It's a technique that basically suggests that we start the beginning of a narrative, or in this case a poem, in the middle of the action. So there's no kind of build up whatsoever. We're dropped into the middle of the experience of the soldier straight away at the start of the poem. So there's a sense of shock here, because there's almost a juxtaposition between waking up and running. So it's as if immediately on waking he was already running. We can think about this in terms of instinct, in the sense that he knows what he's meant to do, but also that he's obeying orders. So he's been trained to immediately obey orders. Okay, in raw seamed hot khaki. So we've got repetition of the word raw here, which can mean potentially his raw emotions. The khaki is his uniform. The fact that it's raw seamed might suggest it's a new uniform. Maybe he's a very inexperienced soldier. Okay, then looking at the green, we've got he and his. So throughout the entire poem, we've got the soldier referred to in the third person singular. Now he's unnamed, which suggests that his name is not important. His identity is not important. This poem is trying to represent a universal experience of all soldiers. But at the same time, we have this sense of one person. It's one man who's having this experience, which is individual as well. And potentially here we could have a sense of him feeling isolated. So even though we can infer that there are lots of other soldiers around him, he's not charging into this battle by himself. His experience is lonely. He's having all of these emotions and this fear by himself. Okay, looking at the red words, we've got heavy, stumbling, lugged. These are very descriptive adjectives and verbs that suggest his struggle and clumsiness. So stumbling across the field, he's not running smoothly. It's difficult for him to make progress. The field is very muddy. He's going towards this green hedge, and behind it is the enemy, but he almost doesn't even seem aware of that. He's just so kind of in the middle of his confusion that he doesn't even mention the enemy. He just talks about the hedge itself that he's running towards. And lugged suggests that he's carrying his rifle, but not as if it was something that's useful, that he's going to be able to sort of use to defend himself, but as if it's something that's heavy and actually doesn't feel like it's a useful tool, because he suggests that he uses a simile that it's numb as a smashed arm. So it's like he's just carrying around this heavy burden, which is his rifle. Then we've got this lovely metaphor that people often remember because it's very powerful. It's personified, so all personification is metaphorical, but not all metaphors are personification. So it says bullets smacking the belly out of the air. So this kind of suggests how intense the sound of the gunfire around him is. It's so intense that it's like it's smacking all the air around him. So he's surrounded by this sound. And we've also got some onomatopoeia here, because the word smacking almost sounds a little bit like the kind of rapid gunfire. Towards the end, then, we get another sort of glimpse of his feelings. So it says the patriotic tear that had brimmed in his eye. Brimmed is when it's like sort of overflowing from his eye, or sort of about to overflow from his eye, sweating like molten iron from the center of his chest. So this suggests that the emotions he's supposed to feel a love for his country and a love for his king. And, you know, that you have a sense of, soldiers, this isn't in the poem, but you have a sense of, soldiers maybe singing the national anthem and crying with love for their country. But that emotion that he's supposed to feel has been transformed into this animal terror. We've got this contrast with sweat. And this sweat feels like molten iron, so very hot and very painful, like the physical agony of having to run and run and run. Because remember, he's not allowed to stop. He's charging the enemy. He has to obey the orders to keep going. So he's got sort of, he's breathless and he's in pain. So he's not thinking about his country, basically. Okay, so first line here, we've got in bewilderment, then he almost stopped. So there is this sense of confusion. Bewilderment is a complete and utter lack of understanding. He can't really believe what he's doing and why. And it's such a shock to him to realize that he's running, towards this invisible enemy, because they're behind a hedge. He almost stops because he just has no idea what he's doing and why he's doing it. And the next image is quite difficult, but the most important thing to understand really about it is the feeling here. So he asks a question. It's a rhetorical question, because again, it demonstrates his lack of understanding. So in what cold clockwork of the stars and the nations was he the hand pointing that second? So he's suggesting essentially that fate, think about Romeo and Juliet, the stars, that fate and the nations, the countries who are fighting, are like clockwork, so the hands of the clock turn, and that it's got nothing to do with him. He's sort of caught up in this clockwork where the sort of the mechanism is ticking on, and he's part of it. So he's got no control, he's got no agency, he's just like a cog, like a small insignificant part, and it's all going to keep going no matter what he wants himself. He has no choice here. He was running like a man who has jumped up in the dark. So again, we've got this sense of his actions being automatic, that he's being kind of, he's not really allowed to stop and reflect on what he's doing and why he's doing it. It's all happening, automatically. And there's also kind of a suggestion of terror. So it's like a nightmare, because it says in the dark. We can almost imagine if you jump up and start running in the dark, it's because you could imagine there's a sort of an invisible threat, and you don't even know what is the worst thing that could happen to you. So it's like the worst kind of fear and terror. Okay, so the simile is it's an ironic simile in a way, because he is a man who has jumped up. We don't know if it's in the dark. It could be in the dark, could be nighttime, but essentially he is a man who's jumped up. So he's experiencing that kind of terror of sort of having to run from waking, because of the severity of his situation. And he runs, listening between his footfalls for the reason of his still running. So again, we've got this sense of him not understanding. So his running it's almost as if he's in slow motion. We've got this suggestion here of listening between his steps, as if it's happening in slow motion. Or it could also suggest that it's as if he's being chased. Again, he's not being chased, because remember, he's running towards the enemy. But all his fear and his lack of understanding might bring up kind of ideas of what it would be like to be chased. He's listening for the reason. In other words, the running feels meaningless. He doesn't understand why he's doing it on any kind of deep level, apart from the fact that he has been ordered to do it. Okay, so I've highlighted the last bit here, the shot/slashed furrows, but actually it links in with the next part, because here we've got enjambment across the stanzas. So in the previous stanza we had shot/slashed furrows, and then that just continues into the next stanza, threw up the hair. So we've got, again, this kind of stop-start feeling of the battle, where there's a lot going on all around him. And here is an image now of a hare. So just in case anybody isn't sure, can't remember, a hare is a type of large rabbit, typically known for being very shy, much more rare than a rabbit. So we've definitely got this idea of nature being damaged. The hair itself is damaged, which we'll see in a minute, but also the field where the battle is taking place. So remember, it's a field of clods, so it's muddy. It's not sort of grassy, and it's been destroyed by the running soldiers and by the gunfire. Okay, so threw up a yellow hair. So the field threw up the hair that rolled like a flame. So we can infer that the hare has been caught in the crossfire. It has no agency. So it is its body, it's sort of, the animal itself is physically rolling. And then we've got these really sort of extreme images of agony, crawled in a threshing circle. So it's crawling in a circle, it's not going anywhere. Its mouth wide, open, silent, its eyes standing out. So it's graphic description of agony. The hair could be mirroring the soldiers' feelings, but it could also be mirroring the experiences of soldiers around him who have already been shot. This is, as we can see, it's an image of injury and of destruction of this innocent animal, essentially. Okay, but he doesn't have time to even think about it. It says he plunged past. He just had to keep going with his bayonet towards the green hedge. And again, we have this idea of the unseen enemy. He doesn't even think about the fact that there are soldiers behind that hedge. He's just on autopilot. He's just running because he's been told. And then we have this very sort of important and quite sort of powerful idea here of king, honor, human dignity, etc. So we've got these noble idealistic motives, fight for your king, fight for your country, fight for your own honor, fight for your human dignity. But then those sort of noble ideas are totally downgraded when it says etc. at the end of the line. So etc. just means and so on. So it's like he's just listing things that should mean something, but they don't really mean anything anymore. And then it says in the next line that they're dropped like luxury. So basically, he cannot afford to hold on to these ideas anymore because he's basically fighting for his survival. He can't afford to carry any luxuries with him. He's literally just trying to stay alive. So these, noble ideas, king, honor, human dignity, he doesn't need them. He can't do anything with them. They're no use to him now. He just has to try to fight for his life, essentially. And then we've got this image, a yelling alarm, which suggests to us the sort of the chaotic reality of the battle, the noise and the intensity of what's happening around him. And then very finally, so it says, a yelling alarm to get out of that blue crackling air, his terror's touchy dynamite. So this sense of, he has this sense of urgency that he wants to get his terror out of that situation because his terror is touchy, like dynamite. There's this sense that his terror, his feelings could be explosive. He's struggling to stay in control of his emotions. Okay, so what can we say about these ideas of physical and metaphorical battles? So very quickly, well, the physical battles are quite evident here. We could talk about his physical experience as well as the real battle that he is facing in terms of fighting an enemy. So, there is battle that he is doing in this poem, with his own physical experience, the sort of the discomfort of the uniform, the fact that his lungs are bursting because he's running so hard. So he's got that sort of physical discomfort and pain from what he's having to do. And then, of course, we've got also the metaphorical battles as well. The fact that he is no longer, he doesn't believe in the reasons why he doesn't believe in the reasons he's been told to be in this battle. So he's been told and he's obeying orders, but on a metaphorical level, he no longer believes in the reasons for carrying on and fulfilling this battle. So, all the things that he may have been told, perhaps by the general or the commander, perhaps by war propaganda, fight for your country, be a man, all of those things, they don't mean anything to him anymore. So it all feels futile. Okay, thank you for listening.